Good evening. Story time tonight. We're learning Maseches Yevamos. We're on Daf Tes Zayin, and we're starting 3 lines from the top. The last couple of days, we've spent quite a bit of time focusing in on the sheet of Beis Shammai as to whether or not it was ever really practically paskined that a tzara of an erva is allowed to marry the yavam. And at the top of the page, it says Tashma there. We already learned that Reb Dosa ben Horkenes, or is quoted in his name, that a tzara was allowed to marry one of the brothers. So we're going to analyze that and then go into the details of how this story actually developed, and then that'll basically cover the entire story today. So let's get started. I can't see out of my glasses, which is a bit of a problem. We are 3 lines down on Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, and the Gemara says as follows: Gufa. Bimei Rabbi Dosa ben Horkenes. During the days of Rabbi Yochanan ben Horkenes, we learned the din that he tiru tzaras habas le'achet. We learned that it was permissible for one to for a tzara of an erva to marry an uncle, to marry the yavam. And then the Brisa continues. But the people in the Beis Medrash had a very hard time with this. Rabbi Dosa ben Horkenes was a very, very big chacham. Ve'inav kamu, his eyes stopped working. He was going blind. Ve'inav kamu and milavo lebeis hamedrash. And because of that, he never came to the Beis Hamedrash. So they wanted to argue with him and talk to him and learning, but he wasn't there to be argued with. So says the Gemara, Amar, Umi yelech v'yodiu. Who's going to let him know that we don't agree with him? So Amar lehen Rabbi Yoshua, Ani yelech I'll go. V'acharav me, who's going to join Rabbi Yoshua? So Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says, I'll go as well. V'acharav me, who's the third person who's going to go? And the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva. Fine. These 3 Rabbanim Chashuvim, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva went for a walk to the home of Reb Dosa ben Horkenes. Halchu v'amdu al Pesach Beis. So they went and they stood at the opening of the house. Nichnasa shivchaso. The maidservant saw them and she greeted them outside seemingly. Then she goes back inside, and the Gemara says that Amra lo Rabbi Chachmei Yisrael b'ayin etzlecha. The great wise rabbis of Israel have come to visit you. So Amar Allah, he says to the maidservant, Yikansu, they should all be able to enter the house. Invite them. So they all walked in. Remember, he's basically blind. Tafsu Rabbi Yoshua. He grabbed the arm of Rabbi Yoshua, v'hoshivuhu al mita shel zav, and he puts him down on a bed that's made out of gold. Amar le, Rabbi, emor letalmidcha acher v'yashav. Go, there's another student there. Tell him he can come in too. Amar lo mihu, and he says, who is it? Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. So he says, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, wow. Amar v'yeshlo ben la'Azariah chavireinu. Oh, he knew Azariah from the previous generation. He knew the father, not the son. He didn't even know that Rabbi Lazar was born. So he says, Kara alav hamikra hazeh. Then he called out the pasuk right after that, which is a famous pasuk. Nar hayisi gam zokantiv lo risi tzadik nazov ezaram avakesh lachem. When I used to be young and now I'm old, and I've never seen the righteous lose out on things. V'zaram avakesh lachem, and that their children have a bikush of lechem. Ein Torah, ein lechem ela Torah, and his children are learning Torah. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah is a Talmud Chacham. Tafsavo shiva mita shalzav. He too gets to sit down on a golden bed. Amarle, Rabbi emor letalmicha acher v'yashav. There's another student here as well. Amarle umihu, who is it? Akiva ben Yosef. So how does Reb Dosa ben Horkenes respond? Amarle atahu Akiva ben Yosef sheshimcha holech misofa olam bad sofa. You're the famous Akiva, even in his lifetime, right? So it wasn't posthumous. He was well known in his day. He was the Baal Tshuva. He was the token Baal Tshuva. So everybody knew about him. And Gemara says, "Shave b'ni shave." Why doesn't he get to sit in the golden chair? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. All of these Gemaras, every detail here is going to be parsed out in the Meforshim. Kamoscha yirbu b'Yisrael, there should be more people like you, Akiva.
I'll give up the golden chair and take that compliment.
What?
I'll give up the golden chair.
I 100%. Me too.
Where are we?
Me too. We are just about halfway down on Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, about 8 lines before the wide lines. So fine, they're sitting and learning. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Dosa ben Horkenes, and these 3 rabbis, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. They started talking to him and learning until they got to the shaila of the tzara of the daughter. Can the tzara marry the yavam? They all said to him, they all leaned in, waiting to hear the answer of Rav Dosa ben Horkenes. What's the deal with the tzaras habas? Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? So he tried to skirt the answer to it's a machlokes, as if to say that they didn't know that. Of course they knew that. So it says the Gemara, Yeah, okay, good. Halacha k'divrei, but lamaisa, how do we paskin? So he wasn't as bashful as yesterday's discussion. Amar len halacha k'beis Hillel. Halacha is like Beis Hillel, that we do not allow it, like our Mishnah on Daf Beis, not like the Mishnah that we recently learned with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Amrulay, they said to him, we don't want to be disrespectful, but you should at least know what's out there. People are talking about you. People are saying that you said that the halacha is like Beis Shammai. What do you have to say about that? So Reb Dosa ben Horkinus said, hold on. Amar Lahem, Dosa shamatem? Did you hear my first name? You heard it in the name of Dosa? Oh, did you hear that Ben Horkinus shamatem? Which one was it? Was it Dosa or Ben Horkinus? We'll see what the difference is in a moment. And says the Gemara, Amrulay, they said to him, Chai, Rebbe Stam Shaman. We really, honestly, what we heard is just that it was Stam. It was Ben Horkinus, just your family name, but not your first name. Amar Lahem, well, that makes sense. Ach Katan Yeshli. I have a brother who's also Ben Horkinus, right? We're brothers. So Ben Horkinus, but Bechor Satanhu. He is the oldest of the Satan. What does that mean? Doesn't sound like the warmest of terminologies. So take a look at Rashi. Rashi's 10 lines or so from the top of the page. Dibur Hamaschel Bechor Satanu. Charif, very sharp. Ve'omed al Shmua, and he will stand on his position on any shita. Ve'ose Maise ve'eno shav mishmua so la'asos kerabim. Once he gets an idea stuck in his head, there's no use negotiating with him. He is the Bechor Satan. Some Meforshim changes to Bechor Shanun. He is very sharp. He's very learned. Either way, Yonasan Shemo, the Gemara says, 2 lines before the wide lines. His name is Yonasan. So this person's name is Yonasan ben Horkinus. V'humi Talmidei Shammai. Oh, so if you heard that there was a ben Horkinus who said that the halacha is like Shammai, that we hold that a tzaras erva is allowed to marry the yavam, it must be my brother. By the way, on your way out, he says to them, you do not want to start a conversation with this guy because he's going to give you 300 reasons as to why that's true. This is one of the famed hyperbolic numbers in Shas, 300 and 400. There's a whole list of them, but this is one of the famous ones. Aval, second line into the wide lines. But Dosa ben Horkinus says, alei shamayim va'aretz. Made ani alai shamayim va'aretz. I have testimony. Shal meducha zu yoshev Chagai Hanavi. That on this chair, he points to this particular chair. Chagai Hanavi sat on that chair. Ve'amar shlosha dvarim, and he taught 3 halachos. Here's what Chagai Hanavi taught. Number 1, tzaras habas asura. Wow, that's a problem. That's not a Baskol saying that Shammai is wrong. That's a Navi saying that Shammai is wrong. That's pretty bad. And then the second thing, these are the next 2 are unrelated, that Chagai said. The second thing was that Ammon and Moab, countries that are right on the border, at least at that time, right on the border of Eretz Yisrael, that by them, Ma'aser and Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani b'Shvius, that there still is Meiser Ani during Shvius, normally during a Shemitah cycle. Like right now, for people who are appropriately halachic, there's no Meiser Sheni, there's no Meiser Ani, there's nothing. There's nothing at all. Only outside of Eretz Yisrael. So Ammon and Moab are clearly outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the third thing that Chagai taught was Mekablan Gerim min HaKarduyin umin HaTarmudim, that we accept Gerim from these 2 countries of Karduyin and Tarmudim. Let's finish the story here with Chagai and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah and Dosa. Tanak shenichnesu, when all of the gentlemen, when all of the Rabbanim Chashuvim entered the house, nichnesu befesach echad, they all walked in the front door together. However, kshiyatzu yatzu b'shlosha psachim. Why did they go out of 3 doors? Tosfos on this page says yatzu b'gimel psachim shelo yimteim kulam yachad. They shouldn't all be found by Yonasan b'yikpechein b'halachos v'yitzarchu l'kua halacha kamoso. What was the problem? Majority rules. So if they ended up convincing the Rabbanim in the room, they'd all have to paskin that way. I don't know if why does that make sense that they'd all have to change halacha? That's very strange. Yachid v'rabim halacha kirabim is in a vacuum. Is it just who's in the room, and then all of a sudden they have to keep that way? That doesn't make sense. I don't know exactly what Tosfos means. I'm not sure. Anyways, the Gemara says Paga bo Rabbi Akiva. Happens to be that the door of the Rabbi Akiva went up. He bumped into Yonasan. Yonasan ben Dosa. Akshele, so he started, poking the beehive, and he tried to get Rabbi Akiva, get under his skin. But Ukmein, he stumped Rabbi Akiva. That's a pretty impressive feat right there. Omar lo, and this seems to be a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Atahu Akiva sheshimcha holich misofa olam ba'ad sofa. It's beautiful that you got yourself a wonderful name. However, but you're not even honestly a shepherd for the cows. So Rabbi Akiva has to decide what kind of man he wants to be right now. Does he want to be confrontational, or does he want to, totally de-stress the entire situation? So per his character, what does he do? He's a mensch, and he just ends the whole conversation. He's like, Forget that. Omar lo Rabbi Akiva ve'afilu l'roitzon. I'm not even shaykh to herd sheep. Forget about herding the bigger animals. I'm a little guy. And the humility ends the conversation. What's he going to say? The conversation's over. Okay, you're right. I don't know everything. Good. That's what he says. End of the story. So that is what the Gemara concludes, seemingly, although we should say that it's very confusing right now because we concluded at the top of the page yesterday with this brisa of Dosa that seemingly tzaras habas la'achen is mutter. And then when we actually talk to Dosa, we see that that's not how he paskins. Not only is it not how he paskins, but it's not how Chagai paskind, and Chagai was a Navi. Forget about a Talmud Chacham, he was a Navi, he knew. So if we were posking, we'd have to say that Tzaras Habas is Aser. But why didn't Beis Shammai know about what happened with the Navi? Why wasn't that Dvarim Yeduim? I mean, he's got a chair sitting in his house that was saddened by Chagai. I don't think that was a mashal. I think the language of the Gemara seems pretty clear that he had that. Everybody should know about the famous chair where Chagai, like that. Wouldn't everybody talk about that? The throne in which Chagai said 3 psakim? Very strange. So we're 3/4 of the way down, halfway through the wide lines on Tezayin and Aleph. We're going to continue analyzing the next 2 comments that were made by Chagai on that meducha, on that chair. And one of them was that Ammon and Moab ma'aser and ma'aser ani b'shvius. Why is it that they still give ma'aser ani? Says the Gemara, da Amar Mar, harbe krachim kavshu ole Mitzrayim v'lo kavshu ole Bavel. In the 2 different conquests of the Jewish people, one was ole Mitzrayim and one was ole Bavel. So in regards to ole Mitzrayim, there were a lot of cities that were conquered, and many of them were not reconquered during the Ole Bavel. The kedusha that took place with the kibush of Ole Mitzrayim was only a temporary kedusha and not a long-term kedusha. So what did they do with Ammon and Moab? So the Gemara says that it was conquered initially in Ole Mitzrayim. However, during the crusade, when the Jews were on the warpath to take back Eretz Yisrael, in the times of Ole Bavel, they did not recapture Ammon and Moab. They left them. Why? Very sensitive. It's not always about geography in regards to conquering land. You also have to eat. And because we know that we have restrictions, so we should take very fertile ground and leave Ammon and Moab alone. We'll make them our slaves, but the country is not going to become Eretz Yisrael. Next din, about 7-8 lines from the bottom, Tezayin and Aleph, the Gemara says, Mekablan Gerim HaKarduim B'Tarmudim. Chagai the Navi told us that we are allowed to accept Gerim from these 2 countries. Eini, is it true that we're allowed to accept Gerim from these 2 countries? We're not allowed to. Says the Gemara, Amar Avashi, that's not what Rami Bar Yechezkel meant. What he meant was Kartuyim Itmar. It was a different country. Karduyim and Kartuyim were not the same. Kartuyim Psulim. That the Kartuyim, those people are Psulim, we're not allowed to take any Geris from them. Vika de Amre, some say that the question that the Gemara asked when it said Eini was a little different. After all, what does it say? Tani Rami Bar Yechezkel ein makablim gamer not kartuyim. My love, hainu kartuyim, hainu kartuyim. It's a similar result, but the way we get to there, 2 different ways to get from point A to point B. So says the Gemara, no, Amar Ravashi, lo kartuye l'chud ve'karduye l'chud kedamre inshe kartuye psile. That there really is a difference between these 2 countries, and the din that Chagai said is still spot on, and the Kartuyim were a different country altogether. 4 lines from the bottom, Rav Yochanan v'Savi, these are 2 Amoraim. Savi is a rare name, but that's who he is. Says the Gemara, Ta'amre tarvahu ein makablim gerim tarmudim. So that's a problem. If you're not allowed to accept gerim from the Tarmudim, so doesn't that mean that you're going right in the face of Chagai? Because if you look at the Gemara's quote from a few lines before, it says Mekablim Gerim, not Kardumim, Tarmudim. Tarmudim was one of them. So Rav Yochanan says that we are not Mekabel. Says the Gemara, Umi Yamar Rav Yochanan Hachi. Does Rav Yochanan really say that? After all, v'hatnan, we have a Mishnah. Kol haksamim habayim mina rekem tahorim. All of the ksamim in regards to Tumah V'Tara, we know that by Hilchos Nida, that there is a din called ksamim. A kesem is when a woman sees blood external to the body on a garment, on something that is makabel tumah, whatever it is. That's when we consider it to be a problem. Albeit midirabanan, a woman will not become a nida from a spot if it's external. This is sharply contrasted with anything that's done internal to the body, an internal bedika. That's a din deoraisa. Most likely, that's a din deoraisa of nida. So here, in regards to ksamim, kol ksamim abayim min rekem, from the city of Rekem, says the Gemara, those are all tehorim. Why is that true? Take a look at Rashi, 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Because the goyim don't have the same halachic status in Tuma as Jews do. We're not concerned about the discharge, the dam discharge, the kesem of an akum. And rekem is a bunch of goyim. It's a bunch of non-Jews. They're a bunch of ovdei kochavim. So we're not concerned about them. Rabbi Yehuda mitame mipnei shehem gerim v'toim. Rabbi Yehuda says they are tame because some of them are gerim, and a ger is a yid. And as well, some of them are toim. What's a toim? Take a look at Rashi, very important Rashi hashkafically for how we treat those who may not know better about Judaism, and even those who do know better and rebel anyways. What does Rashi say? The toim, who are these people? Shehemiru dasam, they rejected their religion. The gazra al kismeim, we have a gzera on their aksamim that they do count. We are concerned about their aksamim. She'af al pi shechatu, even though they do averas, shehemiru, that they've left the religion. Yisraelim heim. You don't lose your status as a Jew. We will see later today that shockingly, there was potentially one time in history where Jews had their status revoked, which is exceedingly rare. It's probably, to my knowledge, it doesn't mean anything to my knowledge, but it's the only time I've ever heard of it. We have definitely not seen it in Shas this far. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees when it comes to Gerim V'Toim, and Mibein Ha'ovdei Kochavim, if you're in a country that's purely, or in a locale that's purely Ovdei Kochavim, then the halacha is Tahorim, then we don't care about their Ksamim either. The Havinan Ba, when we analyze this statement of the Mishnah, what do we see? Kapasik v'tani. It says at the end of that Mishnah, mibein ha'ovdei kochavim, and that applies ve'afilu min Tarmud. Oh, so Tarmud was one of the countries that Chagai had said. What did Chagai say? So Chagai, let's find the statement of Chagai. He said that we're makabel gerim. Yet and then Rav Yochanan said, we're not makabel gerim from Tarmud. And then the Gemara asked against Rav Yochanan, hey, hang on one second, they're a non-Jewish country, which means that they're Tahorim. So that's a problem. That doesn't work with what we've been saying. Says the Gemara, says the Rashi on the top of Tezayin and Beis, ve'afilu mitarmud alma, lav b'safek Yisrael kaime. There is no suffix about whether or not these people are Jews. They're straight up goyim. There's no suffix about them at all. So then that's a problem, because it seems to be that they should not have a problem with doing gerus. And it seems from here in this context that there's no reason why we can't accept them to be gerim. So this is the problem of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan's first comment seemed to go against Chagai, because he said you're not allowed to accept gerim from Tarmud. Yet here in this context, on the second line of Tezayin, Rabbi Yochanan says Mekablim gerim Tarmud. And if you want to argue that maybe over here that Rabbi Yochanan's not really saying his own shita, he's saying Zos, this is the din, but below Svirale, it really is not his opinion. Absolutely not, because Rabbi Yochanan halacha kistam Mishnah. It doesn't make sense that he would say that, because Allah is Kistam Mishnah, and it seems to be that this is his shita, because the Stam Mishnah that we just learned is that any place that's all akum, then we are not concerned about their bedikas, we're not concerned about their ksamim, and that should include Tarmud, so they should be able to do giur. So says the Gemara, you're absolutely right. There's a little bit of confusion about Rav Yochanan. Two of his Talmidim, two Amoraim that followed Rav Yochanan, didn't know how to learn Rav Yochanan. They weren't sure what the din was. Says the Gemara, why were we being so concerned about Tarmud? The Tarmud, my time alone. Why would we not be able to accept them as gerim if in fact there's nothing wrong with them? They're just non-Jews. Why would we be makbid to not accept them? So it says the Gemara, pligi bar Rabbi Yochanan v'Sabi. There's a machlokas between these two Amoraim. One of them because is what happened to the Avdei Shlomo, and one is possibly because of what happened to the Benos Yerushalayim. I understand what you're talking about with Avdei Shlomo, because what is that talking about? Because kasavar oved kochavim ve'eved. If you have a non-Jew or a slave, haba al bas Yisrael, who has a child, who has relations with a bas Yisrael, havlad mamzer. This is a very, very, very strong comment that if a non-Jewish man is the father of a child to a Jewish woman, the child is a mamzer. So let's take a look quickly at Rashi. What does Rashi say about Avdei Shlomo? Second and third lines of Rashi. So Avdei Shlomo, that these people were of Tarmud, shenasu benos Yisrael, machmas osheran, because of their wealth. The darin sham bechezkas ovdei kochavim. They were living there as goyim, but with Jewish wives. because Savar Oved Kochavim ve'Eved Habal Bas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. So the Gemara's first answer as to why Tarmod cannot become Gerim is because some of them captured the wives of the family, the descendants of Shlomo, and their children are Mamzerim. So that's a big problem. I get this phone call came out every day of the week. My son married a Jewish girl, but he's not Jewish, so that child's a mamzer according to this shita.
We don't hold like that.
We don't hold like that, but it's one of those things that you hope no one finds the recording about because it's a little bit uncomfortable. That's what the din of the Gemara says. So that shita, we understand why Tarmod wasn't allowed to marry in because they were inappropriate. Yeah, that's not right. What happened with the answer of Benos Yerushalayim? That the reason why we don't allow Tarmod to be Gerim is because they did something with the Benos Yerushalayim. What's that story? Says the Gemara, Pligi bar Rav Yosef Rabbanan, v'tarvai mishmei de Rabba bar Barchan. So Rav Yosef and the Rabbanan don't understand their Rebbe. Chad Amar Tresar Alfei Gabre. There were 12,000 men, and then separately V'shisa Alfei Kashtuye, and there were an additional 6,000 people who were archers. Kashtuye. Rashi says Kashtuye halfway down. Rashi says Moshche Keses, the ones who pulled the bows. They were archers. So there were 18,000 people. 12,000 were regular soldiers. 6,000 were archers. V'chad Amar Tresar Alfei Gabre Uminaihu Shisa Alfei Kashtuye. There were only 12,000 in total, half of whom were archers. What does that have to do with anything? Last short line, Tezayin Amid Beis. When the non-Jews entered into the Heichal, the majority of people, they were peeling the gold off the walls, gold and silver, all the clay shares, whatever. They were stealing everything. That's the valuable stuff. However, Vehaim, the Talmudim, what did they do? The Talmudim, Vehaim Nifnu al Benos Yerushalayim. This was where their crime was. They saw that there were young Jewish maidens, young Jewish girls, and they took advantage of them. Shne'emar, as the pasuk says, Nashim B'Tzion Inu, the women of Zion, they violated Basulos Be'are Yehuda, the virgins who were in the hills of Yehuda. So that's what they did wrong, and that's why the Gemara says in the name of Chagai that we are not allowed to marry the B'nai Tarmud. Not allowed. Allowed. He said we are allowed. Sorry, I just mixed it up. Had it in my head for a second. Let's see what he says. So Chagai had said, no. Well, Makablim Gerim, we are Makabel. So why does Rabbi Yochanan say we're not Makabel? That's why. So Rabbi Yochanan says we're not Makabel because of Benos Yerushalayim or because of the Benos Shlomo. Okay, let's continue. The Gemara says we are on the second of the wide lines. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmeni, Amar Rav Yonasan, pasuk zeh Sar Ha'olam Amru. The following pasuk was said by a Sar Ha'olam, by a Malach. Rashi says this is referring to a Malach. Doesn't mean the master of the world. It just means one of the angels. What is the pasuk? Nar Hayisi Gam Zakanti. I used to be a child and now I'm older. It has to be that it was said by an angel. Why does it have to be said by an angel? Because otherwise, Man Amre, who is the one who would have said this phrase? If you want to say that a Kadosh Baruch Hu said it, how can you say that a Kadosh Baruch Hu ages? We age, but he doesn't age. Says the Gemara, Ve'ela David Amri, you want to say that David said it? Mi kashish kuleha. He didn't live that long. He wasn't that old to say Narayisi Vigam Zakanti. He wasn't 200 years old. He was in his 70s. Says the Gemara, Lishma Mina. It must be that there was another being that said it, and it must therefore be Sar Ha'olam Amru. The Gemara says, V'amar Reb Shmuel bar Nachmeni, another phrase by him, which is why this is brought here. Amar Rabbi Yonasan, Mai dechsiv yado parash tsar al kol machmadeh, that a hand was spread of evil over all of the machmadeh. Ze Ammon v'Moab. This is referring to the nations of Ammon and Moab. What does this have to do with anything? What does the pasuk mean? What did they do? Says the Gemara, when the goyim entered into the heichal, says the Gemara, hakol nifnu al kesef v'zahav. Everyone was trying to steal the gold, the silver and the gold. V'heim nifnu al sifrei Torah, and they went for the Sefer Torah to destroy the Sefer Torah. Why did they do that? Amru zeh shekasu bo lo yavo Ammon and Moabi b'kal Hashem, because the pasuk says Ammon and Moab. This is the story of Lot and his two daughters, where they got him drunk, and then the older sister conceived from him, and the next night they got him drunk again, and the younger sister conceived from him. So that's Ammon and Moab. May Avi, from my father. So then the Gemara. No, I'm just saying it's the context of how Ammon and Moab were created. Yeah. What are you saying? What are you saying?
No, the reason isn't Isser for them Wabel B'Kal Hashem is because on the path from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael they attacked
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
That is their history.
Right, that's lo yav. Right, that was their history. Right, so lo yavo amoni moavi b'kal Hashem. So they went after the Torah, and therefore yisaref be'esh. They wanted to burn the Torah. So this was a personal matter by them because their nations were insulted. What does the pasuk mean when it says Tziva Hashem liYaakov svivav tzarav? That Hashem commanded to Yaakov and to be svivav tzarav, to be surrounded by their enemies. Amarav kegon homanya lefum nahara. This is where the Greeks were engaging with the Jews, Lefum Nara, at a location called Lefum Nara. Rashi says, 2/3 of the way down in Rashi, Dibur Hamaschel Homanya Lefum Nara, Behomanya Yevanim Heim, Umitzayrin Libnei Fum Nara, Shehem Yisrael Ani. That's what they were doing. They were pillaging the poor Jews. This is a line that is seemingly out of its context. Either way, the Gemara continues with one last sugya. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Avasi Oved Kochavim Shekidesh Bizman Hazeh Choshesh in the Kedushin Shema Me'aseres Hashvatim. We know that when there was when Sancheirav sent all the Jews away, that there were 10 Shvatim that held on to some degree of their tribe status. And what we were concerned about, says Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Ravasi, is that if a non-Jew is Mekadesh someone today, we're Choshesh L'Kedushin. What's the nafkamina? Mamzerus. Nafkamina is huge. Because if in fact he is a Jewish man, and let's say that the Kedushin was real, but she's like, forget it, you're a goy, and she goes and marries another man, a Jewish man, and has a baby, the kids and moms are mamish. So says the Gemara, we're concerned that if an Oved Kochavim is Mekadesh and Isha, Bizman Hazeh, their Bizman Hazeh was 1800 years ago. It's not today's Bizman Hazeh. So says the Gemara, maybe he's a Yid. I asks the Gemara from a famous line in the Gemara, called the parish, meruba parish. Whenever we look at a collection of items and you randomly select one of them from that collection, we assume that called the parish, anything that separates itself from the pack is meruba parish, is from whatever is the majority of the pack. So if you have a regular guy in the United States of America, statistically, he's Jewish. If he happens to... What? Statistically, he's not Jewish. That's a very good correction. Thank you. Statistically, he's not Jewish. So why do I have to assume that there's going to be a risk of mamzerus with this guy who made Kedushin to, he's not Jewish. You got a guy named John from the northern suburbs and he married a nice Jewish girl. It doesn't mean anything anymore. So why do we have to be choshesh for Kedushin if the majority of people who live in the United States in our locale are not Jewish? Says the Gemara, it depends. When do we say that we're concerned about Kedushin? That's when the place has a kviyas, when this is the same thing by the cases that we've learned in previous Maseches, and I'm sure we'll learn again about the cases of Teisha Chatichos Shel Basar. It depends. If there's a kavua, so then it changes things. So what does it mean, kavua? The Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, the pasuk says, "V'inachem bechlach u'v'chibor nar gozen ve'arei madai." Chlach ze chilazon. These are all cities. These are the cities where the 10 tribes live. V'chibor ze chadyav, nahar gozen ze ginza, ve'arei madai ze chamdon ve'chavroseha. Some say that Arimadai is a little different. It's near B'chavroseh, different locations. Chavroseh Haman. What does that mean? Amar Shmuel, it's Krach, Mushchi Chid Gibidum. These are all locations. So in those places, that's where the 10 tribes. I was on a plane once, and some guy saw that I looked like an Orthodox Jew, and he said to me, "I'm from the 10 lost tribes." He was telling me he's from the 10 lost tribes. I'm like, "You're absolutely not a Yid. That's for sure. There's nothing to even talk about." So even when they tell you that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We need more yichus than that I'm one of the 10 tribes from something that happened 1800 years ago. There's not a rai at all. He's a goy d'oraisa called the parish meruba parish. That's not kvias that he says that he's one of the 10 tribes. But if Taka says, so let's talk about a case right now. Let's say that this happens all the time. They'll tell you as a mole, you get a phone call. My name is so-and-so. Let's say I know the girl side of the family and I know that they're Jewish. Oh, tell me about your husband's side of the family. Yeah, he's just a nice guy from Northbrook. So what's the kviyas? Is it called a parish meruba parish mamish? Like you take the population of Northbrook, and if there's 51, or she's likely to marry a Jewish guy, and there are Jewish guys. Like, how do we look at these sugyas? No nafkamina for the status of the baby, because the baby follows the mom. We're going to learn the Mari Makomos today on the top of Daf Yud Zayin. Very important Mari Makomos. We'll learn it in a moment. But the point of the Gemara here is that when do we have to be choshesh about the guy doing Kedushin to a Jewish girl, and that maybe he's one of the 10 Shvatim? That's only when there's a Kvias. That's only when there's a Kvias. And if there isn't a Kvias, that this is a place where we presume that the 10 tribes lived, so then we fall back on the rule of Kol de Parish Meruba Parish, and then all is well. Good. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yochanan v'chulan lifsul. All of these are going to be problematic cases. What does the Gemara say? That they're all going to be puzzle. Rashi explains, top line of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, the puzzle says the Gemara, Ruban Mamzerim. Wow, that's not good. In those communities, that's a very big problem. Okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara that if you, in the beginning of this story, we heard that Rav Yehuda told Rav Asi this din that an Oved Kochavim, that were concerned about his Kedushin. We know about Rav Yehuda that he had the distinct privilege of learning both by Rav and by Shmuel. So then when he was learning by Shmuel on the 4th and 5th lines on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, Ki Amrisa Kamei de Shmuel, when he told over this din that he heard from Rav Asi, that an Oved Kochavim that was Mekadesh, a woman, we are concerned that he's from one of the 10 Shvatim and the Kedushin might be Chal. Amar Lei, well, that's not true. Bincha haba min Yisrael is kari banecha. Is kari bincha. When you have a child with a woman who is Jewish, then that child is your son. However, says the Gemara, ve'ein bincha haba min ha'ovedes kochavim kari bincha ela bina. Yikes. Says the Gemara that the child of an ovedes kochavim is not your child. It's her son. It's not your son. It's her son. In other words, the baby's a goy. And this Mari Makom is quoted la halacha in the Rambam. It's quoted in the halachos of Isurei Bia early on in Perek Beis. And this is one of the key Mari Makomos that we utilize to clearly stipulate that only with the birth of a child to a woman who is Jewish is that considered to be your child, to be a ben. We always follow the mother. But what we see from here is that this is not considered a case of mamzerus. We see that the Kedushin wasn't the problem. It's just a question of Jewish status. So why are you saying that there's Kedushin, Rabbi Yehuda? Says the Gemara, so that was his question. Says the Gemara that shouldn't be a problem. Says the Gemara that's not true. It could be that generation had daughters. And if that generation of the Asar Shvatim had daughters, then those girls are Jewish. But then the next generation, all of those kids are also Jewish because they're girls. The Amar Ravina, take out the word Shmamina. Ben bitcha habamina oved kochavim kari bincha. So says the Gemara, a terrible answer. Gemiri, we have a tradition. Dibinasa de'ahu dara. The women of that generation is teruye itzdaru. They were all torn up. So the Meforshim explained that what we're talking about here is Rashi says it terribly. Itzdaruye itzdaru, halfway down. Nivka rachaman. Their uteruses exploded or were torn up. Miliklot zera, they were not able to receive zera. V'nasu akaros. All of the women of that generation were barren. There were no multiple generations of children born then. And Ika de Amre, another version of this story is Ki Amrisa Kamei de Shmuel. When Rabbi Yehuda quoted this din in front of Shmuel, Amar Le lo zazim ishamat she'asam ovdei kochavim gemurim, that they did something, again, how does it work? I don't know, but they made all of these people into Ovdei Kochavim, and that they were no longer halachically considered to be Jewish. I don't know how that works. Shene'emar b'Hashem bagadu kivanim zarim yaladu. These are zarim, they're strangers, they're not Yidden. So again, this is the Meforshim speak about this. You can look around, not here, but the Meforshim do speak about this idea as to how it could be. Is it like a horasha, not so clear? And what are the mechanics? Do we have a hidden system in place to undo Jewish status? That could solve a lot of problems for very complicated scenarios. For agunos, sorry, you're no longer a Yid. You don't matter anymore. That'd be an unbelievable solution. We obviously don't use this, but what does it mean? So ayin sham in the Meforshim. We'll stop right here, about 12 lines down or so at Yosef Rav Yosef. Yirtzeh Hashem will pick up tomorrow night with with a blot and a half. All right, so we'll learn until the bottom of Yud Ches, and then on Shabbos we'll learn Yud Ches and Beis and Yud Tes. For those for whom I have yet to share, Shabbos will be a regular time. I was supposed to do a bris, unfortunately it was pushed off to Sunday, and we'll have Daf Yomi an hour before Mincha as usual. Wishing you all a beautiful night.